everyone, Miss Wares here. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more about our eighth notes, what they look like, how to draw them, and how to count them. So go ahead and title your page, Eighth Notes. I'll give you a few seconds to write this in. As you know, an eighth note looks like this. It's kind of like a quarter note, but it has the little flag at the top. And it takes up half of one beat. Our quarter note, draw right underneath here, looks like this, has just the stem that goes straight up, no flag. It takes up one full beat. And we've been practicing our quarter notes a lot. Usually in our 4/4 time signatures, we have our 4 quarter notes that take up the full measure. Well, if I were to draw out a full measure, as you know, this quarter note has 2 eighth notes because eighth note takes up half of a beat, so a half plus a half equals 1 whole beat. So this is kind of like a little mini version of our rhythm tree. If I were to write out an entire measure of quarter notes, and we don't have to draw a full staff, just write a staff like this. If I had 4 quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. And each one of these quarter notes has 2 eighth notes. Make sure you get them all in there. So total, we're going to have 8, because that's what 4 times 2 is. If I had a measure that looked like this, it would be kind of confusing to tell which one I'm on because there's so many. So there's an easier way that we can write our eighth notes. Go ahead, and if you have enough space, you can continue. I'm going to get to a new page. I'll leave that up there at the top for those of you that still need to catch up. So 8 eighth notes, an entire measure, there would be 8 total. That's a lot to count. So an eighth note, it can be drawn a couple different ways. It could be drawn with the flag, which is what we've been practicing, and 2 of them would look like this. Or I can combine those 2 eighth notes to look a little bit different. It's easier to read. It would look something like this. So at the top, they are connected by this thing called a beam. Make sure you write that down. So now there's no more flags. It's kind of like the flags came off of the notes and they just flipped over and they connected to make one bar, one beam that goes across. So now we know that these 2 eighth notes take up 1 beat. So now my full measure of eighth notes, instead of writing them all separate with the flags, it would look something like this. We still need 8 of them total, so that's how many note heads we're going to draw. 1, 2, connect those 2 with the beam. Next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is a little easier to read because now you can see that there's 4 groupings of those eighth notes with 2 eighth notes in each grouping. So now we know that there's 4 beats. So just like when we would label our quarter notes, if I were to label this measure up here, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. When we label my measure of eighth notes, it's still going to have the numbers on where that downbeat, where that quarter note would start. As you know, every measure starts with the number 1. So this first eighth note here is going to be 1. Now we have a very special term that we use for that second half of the beat that is that second eighth note. It is called and, kind of like A-N-D. That's how we say it. But when we draw it, when we label our notes, we're going to use a little plus sign, just like that. It's a shortened way of saying and. Now that takes up the whole first beat. So number 1, we're done with it. Moving on to beat number 2. So again, that first eighth note is going to be the number. The second eighth note is going to be our and count. Same thing for beat number 3. And then same thing for beat number 4. So now you can clearly see where all of the downbeats are. That's right here. with the numbers. And then the second eighth note, we like to call it an upbeat. So that is the second eighth note in one beat. And it's kind of easy now that we're doing our eighth notes and tapping our foot, because it lines up with how we tap our foot. So an upbeat coming up is the same thing that our foot does. So for example, if we have our metronome on and we have a nice steady beat, here, I'm going to put my metronome on so that I can give you an example. And if we had a measure of quarter notes, we would count it 1, 2, 3, 4. But now we have twice as many notes. So we're going to count it kind of twice as fast. But those numbers are still going to happen on the click, right, with the metronome. But our foot, same thing, happens with the click. Everybody try tapping your foot with me. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. That is eighth notes, what you're doing with your foot. Down, up, down, up, down, up. Every time I say up, that is the upbeat. So now, if I were to count this entire measure of eighth notes, it would sound something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Try it with me. 1, 2, ready, go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... So, gotta kind of keep it moving, right? Same thing, now try tapping your foot and counting at the same time. You'll notice that when you say the numbers, your foot goes down. When you say the and, your foot comes up. So try it with me. Let's get our foot going. Down, up, down, up, down, up. Counting this measure. 1, 2, ready, go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Awesome job. So that is kind of what a full measure of eighth notes would look like. That's how we count it. That's how we label. So now you know that second eighth note, we're going to be labeling it with the plus sign. And when we say it out loud, it's going to sound like the word and. And so if we have this entire measure, we know that there's 8 eighth notes total. It's easier to see them when they're connected with a beam because you can see the beat. One more thing I'd like to go over is that sometimes in music, if there's multiple of these groupings of eighth notes together, they'll connect the beam even longer. So the biggest thing that you need to remember is if there's one beam connecting these notes together, they're going to be eighth notes, kind of like there's only one flat. So let's take a look at what that would look like. If I have my measure, go ahead and draw this. And I have my eighth notes. I'm still going to draw 8 of my note heads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Draw my stems. Make sure that they're on the right side of the note because the stems are going up. Now, this time, instead of grouping them in twos, I'm going to group them in groups of 4. So you'll sometimes see this in music. It doesn't change the way that it sounds. It just looks a little different. So now you know we're still going to start on beat 1. That second eighth note, it's still the other half of 1, so we have to label it with and. And then the next one just moves on to 2 because we've already completed that first beat. So we have 2 and. Next beat is going to be 3 and 4 and. So our downbeats are still in the same place. It just looks slightly different. So this measure, I would count it exactly the same. So that's a little bit about our eighth notes, what they look like in full value. And next time we'll talk a little bit about mixing our eighth notes with our quarter notes and how that would sound. So make sure you have all this written in and get it uploaded to your assignment. That's all for today. Bye, everybody.